So in our last slideshow, we learned about the Mesopotamian city-states of Sumer, and these were the world's first cities and the first emergence of civilization on the planet. And for thousands of years, these city-states, they grew bigger, they grew more numerous, they grew more complex, but they remained independent and isolated communities. What we're going to talk about today are the world's first empires, and this is where all of these city-states get conquered by a single ruler and united into a larger civilization. But first, let's start with an empire. What is an empire? Well, to understand that, let's talk about how you make an empire. There are 3 steps if you want to make an empire. First, you use military force to conquer your neighbors. Pretty simple, right? Go forth and conquer. Step 2, once you have conquered your neighbors, what you do is you use the threat of military force to extract resources from them in the form of tribute. And so tribute is just anything that these people give to you so that you choose not to kill them. Step 3, you use the tribute that your neighbors give to you to maintain your empire and to expand your empire. And so one thing I want you guys to think about is what are different ways that empires can use these resources that they get in the form of tribute to maintain and expand their empire. What are different ways you could go about doing that? We'll have some different examples. So as I've already said, the Mesopotamian city-states remain independent for thousands of years. And so you can see here, all these little dots were originally independent city-states. But in the year 2300 BC, we see the emergence of the world's first empire. The king of Akkad, which was a region just north of Sumer, conquers all the other Mesopotamian city-states, and he forges them into a single empire. This we call the Akkadian Empire, and it lasts for about 200 years, which doesn't seem that long in light of the thousands of years that the cities have been around. But as we'll see, most empires tend to be pretty unstable. They emerge, they expand, for a couple hundred years they dominate an area, and then they disappear. So for a while after the Akkadian Empire had crumbled, there was a period of confusion. Barbarians had flooded in from the north and from the east, and they had basically destroyed all of the advancements that the Akkadian Empire had achieved. But in 1790, we see the emergence of another empire that restores order and the connections between the cities. And this is the Babylonian Empire, established by Hammurabi. And so the backbone of Hammurabi's conquest and foundation of empire was his disciplined army, right? Remember, step 1, you have to subdue your neighbors using military force. Hammurabi does this. He has his soldiers, they're well trained, they're well equipped, and they can go around and beat down the armies of all the neighboring city-states. Thus, he can force them to give him tribute, and he can use this tribute to build his empire. One thing that he does to stabilize his empire is he tries to force everybody to become part of the same religion. And so he wants everybody to worship the god Marduk. And Marduk was the chief god of the city of Babylon, which is where Hammurabi was from. And so he hoped by forcing everybody to worship Marduk, this would help everybody to get along and to agree rather than to argue and eventually break up, which is what most empires do. He also tries to establish a uniform code of law. And this also, he hopes, will help his empire to remain stable in the long term. Because if everybody has a similar set of laws, then they can all work together effectively. And so Hammurabi's law code is pretty important because it's one of the first written law codes in human history. And first of all, it outlines a bunch of rules for what to do for criminal acts. So when somebody does something terrible, like stealing or murder or stuff like that. It also outlines, however, a code of civil law. And civil law is not for punishing criminals, but it's for regulating everyday life for normal people. And so it makes up a bunch of rules for how people can go about conducting their business, for how people can get married and what the rules are for divorce and rearing children and stuff like that, and also what the rules are for farming. So Hammurabi is trying to make up a set of laws that governs every aspect of human life. And so what I think we need to think about is, what are the advantages of establishing a code of law, trying to regulate all aspects of life in your empire? Well, one thing is that if everybody's following the same code of law, then when you travel from city-state to city-state, everybody will understand how to act. And that helps if you're trying to establish a broad-reaching empire. But also it allows Hammurabi to claim that he has brought righteousness to the land and gives him some sort of foundation on which to base his claim to be emperor. But eventually Hammurabi's empire does crumble. About 200 years later, these people called the Hittites stream down from the north out of Turkey and conquer Babylon. So they come from Anatolia, which is another word for Turkey. It's that peninsula that we've already talked about a little bit. And the Hittites are an incredibly powerful military force. Remember, that's the step one for any empire, is military might. And so what makes the Hittites so powerful is they developed two technologies that nobody else has ever seen before. The first is the use of chariots. So there's a picture of a chariot there. It's usually a two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses, and how it works is one guy drives the horses and another guy stands on the back, usually with a bow and arrow. And what they do is they shoot a whole bunch of arrows at other people, and then at the last second they can turn around and run away. And so the guy on the chariot is basically immune to whatever the people on foot are trying to do. The other key breakthrough was ironworking. So up in Turkey, there were huge reserves of iron ore, but the Hittites were the first people to learn how to take these rocks that contain trace amounts of iron, to cook them down, and to purify the iron into the metal that they would use for all sorts of stuff. They could use it for farming implements, but more importantly, they could use it for warfare. They could make armor, they could make swords, and they could also make the wheels and axles for their chariots. And iron was a huge advance over earlier metals because it was cheap and plentiful to produce. So using these technologies, in 1500 BC, the Hittites destroy Babylon, burn it to the ground, they say. And soon afterwards, in 1400 BC, they establish an empire over much of the same territory. This empire lasts for about 200 years, which seems to be the average lifespan for empires in this region. And so the Assyrian Empire is the next one to come along on our list. And these guys actually helped to defeat the Hittites in 12,000 BC, and then 100 years later began to expand and forge their own empire. And once again, these guys were known as feared warriors. Of course, you have to be a good warrior if you want to have an empire, right? And one thing that they do besides beat people in battle is they have this policy of deportation. And so what this means is once they conquer a territory, rather than just forcing whoever lives there to pay tribute, what they do is they force these people, these conquered people, to move away. And then the Assyrians bring people from their own cities to populate these new areas. And this was a strategy they used in hopes of ensuring long-term loyalty from conquered areas. Rather than depending on other people, they depended on their own people, who they used to populate new territories. Also, in spite of their viciousness on the battlefield, the Assyrians were famous as very cultured rulers. And actually the first library that we've ever discovered existed in the Assyrian capital. And what they had done is they brought together all of these clay tablets from all over the Middle East. And thousands of these things were stored in this library, which actually was discovered complete about 100 years ago and gave us all sorts of important information about the Assyrian Empire. However, around 600 BC, so notice the Assyrians made it a lot longer than a lot of these other empires did, people from conquered territories rose up in rebellion against the Assyrians. And these included people from Babylon and also people from the east. And these people banded together and defeated the Assyrians in battle and burned most of the important Assyrian cities to the ground. So, after the Assyrians disappear, we see new empires continuing to emerge. The cycle of empire continues. We see the emergence of one power, it rises, expands, and falls. And then another power comes to take its place. We see this first with the Babylonian Empire, which exists for only 100 years. It expands and out from Babylon and conquers a lot of territory. They are soon defeated in turn by the Persian Empire, which exists from 500 to 300 BC. The Persians are then conquered by Alexander the Great, and we see another empire called the Seleucid Empire take its place. And so on and so on. Basically, for the whole of human history, this area is continually dominated for short periods of time by different empires. But so there's a strong pattern here that I want you guys to be aware of, and it is this, is that the empire emerges, there's this rapid expansion and development of strength, a period of domination, and then eventually, sometimes quite quickly, total collapse. Here's a timeline that might help you make sense of all this stuff. It puts into perspective how long these city-states were independent, and then how long each of the empires existed for. We haven't talked about the Persian Empire yet, but we're going to talk about them in a separate slideshow in a couple of days, because they're extremely important. So here are the key terms. These are going to be on your key term list. Please make sure you understand the meaning and the significance of these 7 terms here.